Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining me for today's SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. Today is April 10th, and we're coming you today with three new stories that we'll be covering in depth from this past week in our news feeds. And for those that are new to SMIE Consulting's Midweek Roundup, this is our weekly Wednesday live chat where we discuss three issues that have popped onto our radar screens in the last few days. And we take a little bit more in-depth look into what those topics might mean for institutions, for companies, for individuals that are engaged in international education, and looking forward to discussing with you today some of the results of what I've seen in these three articles that might have relevance to what you do in international education. So thank you for joining me today. Always a pleasure to connect with you on this platform. And as always, the stories that I cover each week, are found in our SMIE Consulting e-newsletter that comes out Mondays each week, and it's called our All the SMIE News, Social Media and International Education News Fit to Share. So I always share the link to the most recent edition of that newsletter in our Facebook live chat, and I put the link to that there now. And you can also check out the past editions of that where we get these stories. And you can also subscribe to that newsletter if you're not already. So thank you again for taking the time to get connected with us here at SMIE Consulting. For those not familiar, I started SMIE Consulting back in 2014 when I left Education USA. I had worked in DC for 6 years for Education USA, and it was time to spread my wings and do some consulting after almost 25 years in the business now, over 25 years in the business of international education, working both on the campus side and the provider side, as well as the high school side, doing guidance, counseling, and admissions. I've had a chance to see this industry grow, and in ways that I never expected, certainly. And certainly there's a lot we can learn from each other, and that's one of the best things about who we are in international education. For the most part, we are collaborators, and we like to share our successes and also our failures so that we can learn from them as a group. And one of my responsibilities for one of the folks I do consulting work for, is formerly Hot Courses, now IDP Connect. They have asked me over the last year and a half or so to do articles on different topics of relevance to international educators, but also to consult with institutions that they partner with on their Hot Courses platforms overseas. And it helps me get a sense and stay informed and connected to institutions and what their current issues are. So that's part of what I do with the monthly article series. And the most recent series has been for IDP Connect that I've done is called Lessons Learned. And the fourth version of that, or the fourth part of that, and Deanna, thanks for joining me. Great seeing you last week at the Ohio State Drive-In. Hope you're well. And one of the things that I do with these articles in this Lesson Learned series is we started with lessons learned post 9/11. I was fortunate enough to be actually overseas at the time of 9/11. My wife and I were teaching at an international school outside of London. We were there from 2000 to 2002. And certainly a lot of the changes that happened on campus were certainly felt immediately after 9/11. But the first couple of parts of the series for Lessons Learned, we looked at how both U.S. campus representatives and also folks who were overseas, Education USA representatives, responded to the changes that were going on as a result of 9/11, and how universities adapted to those challenges that were posed. And we looked at the first two parts of this series. We looked at how institutions adjusted back then, and we came up with to the conclusion that there are four main elements to how institutions responded in the wake of those 9/11 attacks as it related to international student recruitment. One was to adapt to challenging circumstances through diversifying markets. 2 was adjusting messaging and methods of communicating with prospective international students. 3 was building new partnerships to show commitment to international student recruitment. And 4 was investing in meeting the needs of current international students on campus. So those 4 we saw reflected as success stories or methods of success on numerous different college campuses that grew, at least maintained if not grew, in the post 9/11 era. So what I did in part 3 and part 4 of this series for IDP Connect was look at how those same lessons could be applied to 2016 election, post-2016 election results. And the findings did mirror, thankfully, for the sake of this series, did reflect very well on how those same tactics or strategies were and are being implemented successfully in the post-2016 election, where our industry was shaken again but for very different reasons, obviously. The 2 pieces that I looked at in this most recent edition of the series is how building new partnerships has developed in this current post-2016 election cycle. And we see some of the similar trends in terms of one of the things in the post-9/11 era happened was really the growth and emergence of state consortia on different college campuses across the country, in different states around the country. We see that again in post-2016 elections. We see new consortia forming or ones that had been inactive regaining strength and momentum and motivation and energy. And Study Maryland is one of the examples that I cite in the article, and I certainly encourage you to check those out. And though there are a couple of quasi-international organizations here in Ohio, there really isn't one that is active and engaged in promoting international education, promoting our state as a destination. So would certainly love to see that change here because having been a part of state consortium in Indiana back in the mid-2000s, that had such a dramatic impact on our institutions and our state. And I wish that more states would see that. Right now there are about 34 state consortia in various states of activity. But I would say there are probably 5 to 10 that are actually doing things well. Aside from Study Maryland, Study New York, Study Hawaii have been very active in recent days and have very different models of operating. So encourage each of you to check those out and see if your state, if doesn't have one already, to think about how you might be able to start an equivalent in your particular location. Now, what I really like about some of the other examples of partnerships that I was able to uncover through the research for this article, we look at what a state school in a big city in the Midwest, University of Illinois at Chicago, how they have worked with Education USA in Pakistan. One of their advisors there, or former advisors now, had brought groups of Pakistani high school students to the United States for several years and had now made this a real important and put out proposals for bid. And there were more of these kind of academy kind of programs developing. EdUSA had their own academy program, bringing high school students in over the summer for short-term experiences on college campuses. And Rick O'Rourke, a good friend of mine, former REAC for Education USA in Northeast Asia Pacific, and has been at UIC for a number of years now, has developed that relationship with Pakistan to bring those students to their campus during the summer, and has had some students enroll as a result of that program. They've also been involved in the Chicagoland Counselor Tour, where they've invited international counselors into their campus along with other Chicago area schools, and that's had an important benefit for them. We've seen a very different tack taken by University of Missouri, a flagship institution in Columbia, Missouri, where Ryan Griffin, Director of Office of International Admission there, has indicated that they have had significant flows or increases from Brazil and from Vietnam as a result of their College of Education's K through 12 program education, where they provide English language curriculum instruction at several private secondary schools outside the United States, in particular Brazil and Vietnam. And indirectly through those teachers working abroad at these private schools, Mizzou has gotten a bounce from those two countries. So community colleges even have seen benefits. And they have where they've kind of been. They have to be very focused in what they do because they are small teams, maybe even a one-person office that handles multiple things for internationals. Don't do a lot of traveling, if any, and they're forced to look at using third parties to help them get their jobs done. At Parkland College in Illinois, basically in Champaign-Urbana area. They have partnerships now with Holren in China to recruit students from that country. They also look at using services of Education USA and U.S. Commercial Service that they previously hadn't been doing. So that's been an important part of how they've developed. So at all levels, you can see the partnerships really can form the foundation of how institutions realizing that they can't do it all on their own, and particularly in a time when you need to be nimble, you need to be diverse in how you approach different topics. So that partnerships is certainly an important element, and the other half of that that we covered in this series in part 4 is investing in your current students and how important that message is to your overall development. And that's a evergreen kind of a concept for international educators, that unless you take care of your current students on your campus, particularly during times of trouble, then it will come back and will hurt you. If you don't take care of them, it will come back and hurt you as they go home after having bad experiences and then tell their friends, and so on and so on. So that concept, how it's manifest in post-2016 elections, you see how campuses reacted in the wake of the travel bans that were introduced in early 2017, and how many campuses, not all, but many campuses had sessions for their international students to help to provide information for them and to comfort them, and particularly those if they were from affected countries, about whether they should go home over the breaks, or and particularly when there may be chances they might not get back in. But also, it's investing in them as students, not only showing you that you care and you're there, but also investing in who they are and letting them know that they are still welcome. The You Are Welcome Here campaign certainly had a lot to do with that in terms of reflecting how campuses, not just international offices, but how advising, English language programs, dining services, residence life, all different facets of campus life came together in the wake for You Are Welcome Here. These messages were often included international students that were kind of geared towards prospective students. But for many campuses, it was a time when these videos helped rally the campus together in support of their international students. One particular example of that is at Eastern Michigan University, where You Are Welcome Here banners flew all over campus featuring pictures of their current international students. And what a great way to show your support for your current international students by helping to make them feel welcome while they're there. And that's just a real important way, I think, that institutions that really are committed to international education, internationalization, bringing international students to our campuses, sending them overseas. These are the kind of schools that really are seeing, that are taking these approaches, building partnerships, investing in their current students, adapting their messages, and diversifying their markets. Those are the ones that are truly going to thrive in this post-2016 election international ed environment. So that's the first news article we'd cover. The second is a bit interesting, and it's one that I like to share success stories, because if it's all Debbie Downer stuff, it's not something that I want to obsess about too much, because that doesn't get us anywhere. If we can learn from mistakes, that's one thing. But let's take a look at what one institution, and we'll stay in Ohio for this one, at Youngstown State, became, interestingly, the fastest growing public institution in Ohio in terms of its international student population since 2016. They've seen, in the course of the last 2 years, they've seen an increase of over 50% in their international student population from fall 2016 to fall 2018. Gone from not a huge population, 363 to 581, but still for a public state institution, particularly in Ohio, where a number have been struggling, and there are a number across the board that would fit into that category, public and private, to have that kind of a growth in a short period of time is pretty significant. How do they do it? Their director has said that That Youngstown has, and this is a quote from her, this is Carly Devenberg, Assistant Director of International Student Services, says that Youngstown has internationalization in its DNA. But now, instead of working in the mills, international students are coming here to study additive manufacturing. Interesting. I didn't know that was a part of the curriculum at Youngstown State, additive manufacturing. So curious to see how that develops and where their trends go. She did say one of the areas that they had seen significant growth, certainly it has been in students from Nepal. The link again to the article is in the comment section on the Facebook page for SMIE Consulting. She said that there have been scholarship programs, scholarship packages specifically for international students, and that representatives of the college had attended academic fairs in Nepal, which resulted in significant growth from that country in the past 2 falls. That's 2017 and 18. So certainly, having worked at an institution in Ohio that had a significant Nepali population, I know that Nepal was one of the largest, has been one of the fastest growing countries in the top 20 senators to the United States, top 25 senators to the United States. In fact, they are now in 9th place overall as of the 2018 Open Doors report. Students from Nepal have been growing dramatically and many times double-digit increases the last 3 or 4 years. So their numbers have been growing, and a number of schools across the country have benefited, and it certainly seems like Youngstown State has. But what I really like about what Youngstown State has done is they've really put their money where their mouth is in terms of scholarships. They've developed international student-specific scholarships, whether it's, don't know the specifics with Youngstown State, but certainly if they've basically taken the out-of-state portion of tuition that they would have paid and given that to them to deserving students in the form of scholarship. That's certainly a leap forward in terms of how universities can and should be doing what they can to attract international students. And certainly we'll see, I think, more scholarships like this. Certainly, You Are Welcome Here started a scholarship program this past year for the fall 2019 intake that's coming up. The scholarship was launched last year, and that now has over 57 universities that are committed scholarships of at least half tuition to international students coming in as a specific You Are Welcome Here scholarship. So I'm eager to see how that happens. Sorry for the feedback on the mic. We changed microphones this past week. Yeah, sorry about that. We're certainly excited to see what other institutions are going to be doing, like Youngstown State. And I'm really eager to find out from the fall intake this coming year with regard to the You Are Welcome Here scholarship, those 50-odd schools that have participated in it, how well received their scholarship programs have been. I'm sure we'll hear more about that in the coming months as we get closer to enrollment. The last article that I'll mention today is one that is kind of one of my private crusades that I'm on recently, and that relates to the issue of test optional. Now, for those who are aware of what the issues are, test optional has been a trend over the last few years amongst U.S. institutions that decide not to require SAT or ACT for admission as freshman students or first-year students to institutions. The policies are different depending on where you go. They are not universally the same. Some will still require it because, like for athletes, they still need an SAT or ACT to qualify and be cleared in NCAA clearinghouse terms. Other schools put restrictions on, well, we still need SAT, ACT for our more competitive programs as distinguishing factors. And this story from Inside Higher Ed that I'm just posting now does cover this new push in test optional. There's been a number of institutions. Bucknell announced in February that it was ending the requirement that all applicants submit SAT or ACT scores. Then you saw Creighton, DePaul, Fairleigh Dickinson, Ferris State, Evergreen State, University of Denver, and University of Minnesota Crookston also jump on the bandwagon here. This past week, University of San Francisco and Springfield College in Massachusetts also decided to become test optional. What is not always the case, and this is where my crusade begins, or continues, is that for many of these schools, not all, certainly Ferris State and Bucknell are smart enough where, in my opinion, that they have also included international students in this test optional pool. But for the lion's share of the schools that have gone test optional, international students still have to take the SAT or ACT. Now let's look at this for a second. If you've been following fairtest.org, that is the site where there's a list of universities that are now considered test optional, and on that list. Or on that site, fairtest.org, there's a site link for universities and /universities/optional. This is now a list of over 1,000 schools that have gone test optional. What it doesn't include are, and it doesn't specifically indicate on their own list, but they do have a link to something from for international students. There was a link. Yeah, there's a list now of to that link from for students who attend who are international students at high schools overseas. That list has only about 225 students on it. It's from going back to international ACAC, and it's over on that list. It's from a 2016 list of institutions that was developed at IACAC, now International ACAC Conference in 2016. So that list is one that does have the links to the particular policies on the institutions that are listed there, but it's less than a third of the total colleges that say they're test optional actually extend that policy to international students. And why is that? Off to the good seeing you, Deanna, and hope to see you soon. And best of luck with your advising. And so as we roll on with this, one thing that with regard to test optional, what is the motivation? Why do universities and colleges decide to go test optional? What is typically proclaimed in the press is issues of access and preparedness for the test itself. That's particularly for diversity concerns, that these tests by themselves are biased towards well-off families, to students who have the resources and the time and education background to do well in those exams. Whether that's true or not, the evidence certainly I've seen evidence on both sides of this issue. But the reality is, if that's the main argument, that these tests are no longer a good measure of academic ability. Certainly, all the research seems to indicate that high school grade point average is the best predictor of a student's eventual college success. Whether that's still the case with how significant grade inflation has gotten in high schools around the country and around the world, that's another question entirely. But certainly, if you're going to make the claim that being test optional is for diversity reasons, there are certainly some students that do very, very well in the classroom, but just they don't do well on these exams. Test anxiety, whatever it might be, in these cases, social or economic or class issues that are involved here in terms of ability to do well on these exams. That's certainly not a universal, but if that's the reason that institutions are using to become test optional, because they don't think that students are certain groups of domestic students are equally prepared for these exams or able to do well on these exams. Think about that rationale and try and apply that internationally. why would you not extend this test optional policy to international students who are even less prepared for a test, an SAT or an ACT test that is designed for a U.S. student in a U.S. high school in the United States who has learned American English. This is the problem that I see most significantly with the test optional policies. And I think universities and colleges that do that, what I've seen, in fact, the language that I've seen on a number of different sites that have decided not to extend this to international applicants, is they say it's something to the effect that, well, we still need to still need to use SAT and ACT for international students as a confirmation of their academic performance in high school. Really? A test that's not designed for them is supposed to give you confirmation of how good of a student that they are. I don't get that logic there, and that's something that I think really we see there's real issues in how I think test optional policies are explained. I've asked colleagues who have recently gone test optional if international students are included in their policies, because it's not explained in usually the press release that comes out, and it's certainly not the case or easily findable on their websites. So I really think it's time for institutions, if you're going to go the test optional route for domestic students, there's even more evidence to show and more reason to go test optional for your international students as well. A big deal was made of University of Chicago's policy when they switched last year, but that was one of the first ones we profiled here on the Roundup. And that's a school that it's one of the most selective schools in the country, but they still require that SAT, ACT for international students. So trying to get my head around the biases there that are involved in why these decisions are made the way they are, but certainly it's one that I'm not going to let rest, and certainly encourage, if your campus is not already test optional, to take a long, hard look at why you might need to be or why you aren't already. So thank you for joining me today. I know we covered some issues this week that can raise some interesting perspectives on things, and certainly for those of you who have opportunities to connect with me at upcoming conferences. I know in addition to the Roundup here and the weekly newsletter, I'll be attending the National NASA Conference in D.C. this Memorial Day week. Looking forward to speaking with you there. I'll be presenting on the issue of translations in international student recruitment and their value there, with some great examples from Education USA, from a U.S. university perspective, and more broadly on how translations are an important part of the college admissions process for students, and increasingly should be for institutions. So we'll talk about that during that session. But in the meantime, I look forward to catching up with each of you online and on social. Looking forward to hearing from you as some of your success stories, and happy to share those on the podcast as the weeks go along. So thanks for joining me today, and looking forward to connecting with each of you in the weeks and months to come. Cheers.